Good Sunday afternoon, British Covidians. I open with a statistic, and it's quite a harrowing one, but I think we'll just open with it, okay? Just remember, these are real people. They're not cartoon images. They're not figures registered somewhere on a spreadsheet. They're not something in a log. They're not something really other than real human beings. People who have had lives, family, friends, loved ones, relatives, people who have suffered, people who have loved, people who in many ways are still being loved, even though they are physically not here. I want, as it's Sunday, just to think of all those people that have died, obviously for many other reasons as well, but particularly for those who have died of COVID-19, for the circumstances in which they have died. I think about those who mourn their passing as well, and for how they are still feeling to this day. I'm going to ask a question, and it's really quite a basic one, but I think it's quite important. Do you prefer laws or guidelines? Just think about those two terms very much first, okay? Laws and guidelines. One of the things that the so-called libertarian Tories always tell us, they don't want to pass too many laws. They don't want to over-regulate society. They want, of course, for the free market to rule. They want, of course, for a kind of, Darwinian approach, yeah? A Darwinian approach. Survival of the most adaptable and the fittest. That's what they want. They don't want laws, really, or at least they don't want to over-regulate society. So what do you think would be more important? Laws or guidelines? I'm just searching around for a bit more on the phone while I'm doing that. Right, so laws or guidelines, which are you up for? Now, personally, let me tell you a story about the difference and how things had to change to become laws in America in the 1950s and the 1960s. I was born in the 50s, yeah. There's a guy called Ralph Nader, an American who was very much into the automobile industry, as they would call it, but also an American who was very much into road safety, all aspects of it, road design, car design, absolutely anything that could keep people safe on the roads. Ralph Nader was very concerned about that, but particularly automobile safety. Now, at the time, I think it was Ford. They had a car on the market that, frankly, was like, well, it was the equivalent of the Sherman Tank when it got hit with a round from behind, yeah, an anti-tank round or whatever. They used to call the Sherman Tank the Zippo, yeah, because the Sherman Tank, if it was hit in a particularly vulnerable place, the petrol tank would catch fire, and they ran on petrol, not diesel, yeah, and it would go up like somebody striking a Zippo lighter. Also, I believe the Germans used to call them the Tommy Cooker as well, yeah. But there was a car that Ford had on the market, and I can't remember the name of the car, but if you look at the research, you'll find it. Okay, the car was so vulnerable, and it's what the Americans would call, its gas tank was in such a position in the car that if it was rear-ended, yeah, even at a lower speed, there was every chance that the gas tank would explode people were either killed or they were horribly burned. So Nader thought, well, let's just see if maybe we can get the motor industry to do this. It might have been Ford, it might have been GM, okay? Let's see if we can just get the motor industry to position all of their gas tanks in such a way that, they're less likely to explode if the car is hit in any way. And it was quite a simple modification to do, yeah? Well, apparently, the company manufacturing this car worked out that it would be cheaper to pay off the compensation claims for those horrifically burned, to pay off the relatives of those who had been killed. It was actually cheaper for the car company not to put in the modification, not to change where they position the tank. Yeah, it was actually much cheaper just to pay off the litigants. Yeah. Now, of course, there was nothing in law that could say to them, you have to design cars in such a way that the gas tank can be as safe as possible, and it has to be, it has to be very, very unlikely that it would be ruptured in an impact and would catch fire. Yeah. But the government the state's federal law or whatever didn't cover that. What they did was that they just brought in guidelines for manufacturers. Just guidelines. Yeah. Just guidelines. And do you know what the manufacturers did about maybe making the car safer or other cars safer? Do you know what they did? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. No law compelled them to act. Nothing would happen to them if they didn't act. All that would happen is their lawyers and their solicitors would pay off all the litigants and whatever, and they would be fine. Until Nader forced a change in US federal law. Then, if they designed cars in the way that, the gas tanks were unsafe and whatever like that, if they produced cars that were unsafe like that, they would be breaking the laws. Do you see the point? Laws and guidelines. Let me tell you something really interesting. And I think we found this out in this pandemic, and we found it out kind of almost ever since we've had a Tory government. Don't they just love guidelines? Yeah. They love them, don't they? If it's a guideline for how MPs should behave in Parliament, if it's a guideline for what you should do, either wear a mask or not wear a mask, either 2 metre social distance or don't 2 metre social distance, the government guidelines, they love guidelines, don't they? Yep. They don't like legislating because they want to appear libertarian, free, not constrained by too many rules. Do as you want. Only important thing is, one, that you are happy, and two, that you can make money. Yeah? So guidelines are so good, aren't they? Yeah? They don't really go for rules and laws. Yeah? See how long it took them to make laws saying that you had to wear face masks in pubs, crowded spaces and things like that. Look how long it took them to enact a law that said no more than so many people can gather in a public space. You cannot leave your properties. You must be locked down. Look how long it took them to make a law on that. Do you remember them beginning with, well, I think we can trust the public's common sense. Yeah, I think we can trust the public's common sense. Yeah? You can't. Some things you have to legislate for. Do you remember, if you're old enough, you'll probably remember, when I was in my early teens, seatbelts weren't compulsory. I think we'd just come back from Malta in about 1972, 71. You could get in a car, you didn't have to wear a seatbelt. I think they had to be fitted in cars, but they didn't have to be worn. You know, and the auto death rate, the horrific injuries, the amount of, you know, NHS time and whatever it would take dealing with these things, yeah? For God's sake, it was through the roof, where simply, you know, I'm not saying it will save even now in every circumstances, but just wearing a seatbelt, yeah? The only way you could make people do that was to make it a law. Drinking and driving, I think, in the 50s was not necessarily illegal. You know, you as long as you could maybe, I don't know, walk in a straight line or whatever, you passed the sobriety test. In the 60s, people would go out, have a skinful, drive back. They weren't really breaking the law. In fact, Mungo Jerry in the summertime, have a drink, have a drive, go out and see what you can find. Apparently they changed the lyrics to have a drink, have a drive. Yeah. But this is what this government hate. Another thing you notice about them, even in the whole COVID thing too, do you ever note that they make very general statements? People are always trying to pin them down to something like they are now, whether it will be face masks in shops or not face masks in shop. We don't know. We might not. We're not sure. Michael Gove says no, but somebody else says yes. Yeah? Never, you're not able to pin them down to something specific. Yeah? They make nice big general statements. Because in fact, they couldn't give a shit how many of you die. They don't care. As I've said from the beginning, the elderly, the sick, the weak, the disabled, those who have long-term medical conditions like myself, the most vulnerable, the poorest in society, they want us gone. They want us dead. Yeah? And what a great chance COVID is for them to achieve that aim. It's brilliant, isn't it? Yeah? Now, as you can all be sanctioned for not turning up at the job centre, even during a pandemic, yeah? But that doesn't matter. Yeah? The virus is still out there. I just want you to think why this government hate making laws. They hate it because they pretend to be libertarians. They're not. They're concerned with just themselves, their rich friends, and just elites ruling the country, elites getting richer, elites making all the decisions. Just like anyone says, and this is the final thing, yeah? You know, why the hell can't Labour decide and just bloody say it outright? Let's tax the rich buggers a little bit more to make them pay for COVID. They won't. Of course the Tories won't do that, and Labour won't even ask them to, yeah? Because what they'll do, and Labour are in on this as well, Matt, is they don't want the rich elite to suffer. COVID and all that lot will be paid for not by those at the top with the broadest shoulders to bear the greatest burdens, yeah, but those at the very bottom with the smallest load, the smallest shoulders to bear the heaviest load, and if necessary, be crushed and killed by it. We'll pay, not them.